on to our next story here. I'm sure all of you heard this, but Joe Biden has officially won the South Carolina primary. Duh. I mean, like, we all knew that this was going to happen. But what was interesting to me is the way that mainstream media is bragging about this as if Joe Biden just won the Olympics or something. Couple of problems here. Number one, it's South Carolina. We know South Carolina in the general election is going to be a red state. I lived in South Carolina. It's not turning blue anytime soon. I can tell you that much. Two, they're bragging about this regardless of the fact that Joe Biden was the incumbent. Yes, he had two challengers. He had Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips as a challenger, but they're bragging about this as though they actually had debates. They actually gave press attention to all of his challengers repeatedly. They've actually given more attention to the third party candidates than they have Marianne and Dean Phillips, I would say, right? But they're bragging about it. They're like, yes, look how much he won by. But there's something that they leave out, and I'm going to break this down for you tonight. We're going to look at a little bit of a case study because I did a little bit of research because I was a little curious. But we're going to start with this excitement here from MSNBC. They said, wow, he's getting 97%. Holy smokes, guys. Can you believe this? Can you believe it? They were acting like this was actually a general election, and they were acting like they actually gave his challengers a fair competition. Listen to this.
You're wondering, if you get the same day, would there be any variance? Would that bring the Biden number down? Clearly, it really isn't. Biden's running at 97% statewide. 25% in here. Williamson, Phillips haven't even touched 2%. I mean, I could individualize this county by county, but there really isn't any variance here county by county. We are seeing this, we're talking about the issue of black voter enthusiasm and the core Democratic base for Biden. He's getting 97% in heavily black counties. He's getting 97% in some of the whitest counties, in the whitest counties of the state. It's just across the board here with really no geographical variance. In terms of turnout, you're wondering if you get the.
Okay, so let me jump in here for just a second. So they're bragging about this because at that point he was at 96.7%. And they're like, oh my God, he said Williamson and Dean Phillips barely touched 2%. It's South Carolina. This is exactly why they wanted South Carolina to be the first state. Because they knew, remember, South Carolina is the state that changed the race in the Democratic primary in 2020. Bernie Sanders won Nevada. He won New Hampshire. There's argument about Iowa. But then it got to South Carolina and everything changed. Joe Biden won South Carolina, which is what they expected to happen. That is why the Democratic Party decided to make South Carolina the first state in the primary. Now, New Hampshire and Iowa ignored that, and they went ahead and held, their primaries anyway. But this is why they made that switcheroo, because they wanted to try to show, oh, there's a lot of black people in South Carolina. We'll show that black voters want Joe Biden. And plus, this is the state that helped him in 2020. So they're really running around bragging about this. I would argue, although none of these people are my candidate, I would vote for any of these people, but I would argue this. If they had actual debates, I would argue that Marianne and Dean would have been higher percentage-wise than they were. The media tried their best to make sure that you really didn't know about them. I can tell you because I still have, my parents are retired in South Carolina, and I have friends in South Carolina. They didn't even know these people were running. And they didn't vote in the primary, but they didn't know Marianne Williamson was running. They didn't know Dean Phillips was running. All they knew is that Joe Biden was the nominee. And the reason why they don't know those things, why would that be, guys? Why? Media blackout and no debates, which is exactly what the Democratic Party wanted. Now there's more. Because the way they were bragging about this, and then you have Jamie Harrison coming up, the Black Boule. He's part of the Black Boule. Listen to what he says. This is really telling.
Those folks who were in bondage, the progeny of the folks who picked cotton. Now those folks won't be picking cotton, but will be picking presidents. those folks who were in bondage, the progeny of the folks who picked cotton. Now those folks won't be picking cotton, but will be picking presidents.
So let me explain what's wrong with Jamie's statement there. It's 2024. Jamie Harrison is basically saying, like, we went from being slaves in this country to picking presidents. He's talking about this as if this is the very first time that Black people have voted for a presidential candidate, right? So the pandering. Jamie Harrison is the DNC. He's the chair of the DNC. You have to remember that he ran against Lindsey Graham. Remember that little competition? I knew he wasn't going to win, but he was rewarded by that from the Democratic Party by making him chair of the DNC. He is status quo. He is very much establishment. He is not progressive in any way, shape, or form. But here he is. He's going to sit here and talk about picking cotton. But when a Black woman approached him at one of his own speaking engagements and questioned him about reparations for African-American freedmen in this country, Jamie Harrison ran off the stage. But you want to stand up here and you want to talk about picking cotton. It's laughable. It's absolutely laughable. And what's also bad about this, he is giving Black people in the audience the impression that this is a significant win for the Black community. It's not. Joe Biden isn't doing anything for the African-American community. He hasn't done anything before except incarcerate you, work with segregationists, tell you he didn't want his kids to grow up in a racial jungle, refusing to let Anita Hill's witnesses testify against Clarence Thomas. That's what Joe Biden has done for the Black community. But you have people that are part of the Black Boule, like Jamie Harrison, and they're there to keep the status quo, but to make you believe you're getting a win. One of the greatest tools of white supremacy is to use Black people to do it for you. Jamie Harrison is one of those people. This is why we'll never progress the way that I think that we could in this country, because we have sellouts like Jamie Harrison that are always there to hold the community back as a whole and push for the establishment. That's Jamie Harrison. If you look at the people in the audience, let's go back. Let me show you. See, look at the audience here, folks. Look at this. So you got Miss Senior 2023, Miss Sophomore. Let's see, did he show the Greek life yet? Let me see if we got to them yet. Okay, let me keep on. I'm trying to show you who he's speaking to so you understand who is actually buying into this. She might be at the end. Okay, so you see this? Okay. Notice a lot of older people here. There's a couple of young people mixed in, but a lot of older people. And then where's her right there? There we go. The Greek life organizations. These are the ones that hold the Black community back and keep us embedded in a two-party system that is not going to benefit us. So this is what they pull from. Clyburn, I told you, he pulls from the Black church and he pulls from the Black Greek organizations. That's where they get their votes from. That's who's voting. Now, let me tell you what they're not mentioning. This part is interesting. The turnout. Who came out to vote? I think this is very important, don't you? Don't you think this is important? So I was laughing here. Biden won the South Carolina primary with a 4% voter turnout, not something for the DNC to brag about. And you can see I put this clip here. South Carolina primary voter turnout for 2024, around 131,000 South Carolinians voted in the 2024 Democratic primary, making up just around 4% of registered voters statewide. The showing marks the lowest turnout in the last few presidential primaries for Democrats. though those contests were notably more competitive. Why were they more competitive? Because those candidates received media attention and probably because there were debates. I'm going to show you an example of one that might take some of you back. And for some of you that are younger, it may be new to you. 4%, ladies and gentlemen. Now, some people have argued with me. They said, oh, well, it was a primary and he was the incumbent. Yeah. But I have an example to show you that may show you how things have changed. Keep this number in the back of your head, 131,000 South Carolinians. Hold on to that. Eric, if we can put that in the chat, 131,000. So people can hold on to that. Because, yes, there was an incumbent, and I totally get that. But the reality is, the reason why the turnout was so low is because people are not excited about Joe Biden. So mainstream media wants to brag and say that he got that 97%, but then they don't want to tell you how many people actually showed up to vote. I just told you, everyone that I talked to in South Carolina, they didn't go to vote. They didn't even go. And some of them told me, they said, oh, if I knew someone else was running, maybe I would have. Right? Let's do a comparison. I went back to a Democrat primary that was actually competitive. We're going back to 1980, folks. I wasn't even born, but some of you were, and you may remember this. 1980, and I'm going to show you the difference, and I'll show you why they didn't want to have debates. Democrat primary, Jimmy Carter versus Ted Kennedy. Now, Ted Kennedy, of course, is one of the Kennedys. We got a lot of things to say about Ted. We've talked about some of the things that Ted has done on this show. But for the sake of this segment, let's focus on the primary. Now, you remember Jimmy Carter was the incumbent at that point in time. Ted Kennedy decided to primary challenge Jimmy Carter because he didn't feel that Jimmy was doing a good job. Similar to Marianne and Dean Phillips primary challenging Joe Biden. I want to show you the difference. If we scroll down here, we're just going to take a look at the chart. And I think I'm going to zoom out just to, oh yeah, you guys can see this, right? Okay. Jimmy Carter, he won 36 states, 36, right? But watch this. Ted Kennedy won 12 states. Now, some people may see this and think, oh, that's not significant. It is against an incumbent. What kind of I wasn't alive then. So if you were older and you remember, please tell me in the chat. Jimmy Carter apparently had upset enough people to the point where 12 states were willing to vote for his primary challenger. Valerie Ross says, I remember that was back in the day. Yeah. Right? Okay. So I want to show you something. Look at the states that Ted Kennedy won. Arizona, Massachusetts, his home state, of course, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, North Dakota, DC, California, New Jersey, New Mexico, Rhode Island, South Dakota. The South Dakota one was interesting. Vermont, Alaska, Michigan. Okay. And then for some reason, they don't list all of Jimmy Carter's states, but I'll show you just a list of it. Obviously, he won the most, 36 states, right? But watch this. Let's go to South Carolina. We're going to scroll down here. Make sure I don't miss it this time. South Carolina. The red is Jimmy Carter. Okay. South Carolina was won by Jimmy Carter. All right. Hold on to that. Because I want to prove a point. Granted, this was the 80s. I want to show you this. And then we're going to go to, one second. Let me show you what page I picked up. I don't know why, but I have the Doug song in my head. Okay, page 30. So, because I want to show you this chart so you can see what the turnout was like. There we go. And one. Okay, for some reason, I don't know why. I'm gonna put it up here. I don't know why, like on my computer, I was able to actually flip this. Eric, can you rotate this document on here? I was able to rotate it on my computer, on my other computer. If not, just let me know. I didn't know if Type VNC had a rotate option. Because if not, I can just do it by sharing my screen. Probably not. Let me do it the other way. Sorry, guys. Because it let me rotate it in Chrome. Okay. Got it. All right. Let me put this up here. Let me come out. Let me share this. Yeah, Chrome lets you rotate. I just saw someone was asking about that. Yeah, it lets you rotate. All right, check this out. Now I'm going to try to zoom. Okay. I don't know how much this you can see, but I want to make sure you see the words. South Carolina voting history and statistics, South Carolina Democratic primary, 1980. Okay. We're just going to scroll to the bottom. These are all the counties. And I want you to see the total turnout. So this second column, total voted, all the way down here. Over 385,000 people. See if I can zoom it in so you can see it. Can you see it now? There you go. 385,539 people showed up for the South Carolina primary of Jimmy Carter versus Ted Kennedy. 385,000 people showed up in a Democrat primary. Now, let's go back. I told you to hold on to that number. 131,000 South Carolinians voted in the Democratic primary in 2024. That's right. Outside in said, and was a lot less people back then. Exactly. That's the point that I'm trying to make. So here's what I'm trying to say, folks. The reason why they were not going to allow people like Marianne Williamson, Dean Phillips, and anyone else who was primary challenging Joe Biden is because after this race between Jimmy Carter and Ted Kennedy, even though Ted Kennedy did not win the primary, he did win 12 states. And what people have argued is that his primary challenge against Jimmy Carter did enough damage to the point that Jimmy Carter did not win re-election. He lost to Ronald Reagan. You see why they didn't want to have debates? So it wasn't so much that they would think that Marianne or Dean would actually, beat Joe Biden. It was the fact that if they had debates and gave them enough attention, they could do enough damage to Joe Biden that he could lose re-election. He could still lose to Donald Trump. That's why they didn't want to entertain it. And speaking of that, if we go to this clip here, Simone Sanders interviewed Dean Phillips, and I want you to hear how they spoke to him. This is crazy. Like I said, I wouldn't vote for any of these people. Okay? Any of them. I'm not voting Democrat or Republican. I'll be voting third party or independent, right? But listen to the way they speak to Dean Phillips as if, how dare you? How dare you? Listen to this.
You say this is a campaign of principle. If you cannot win, I worked for Senator Sanders in 2015, 2016. Lots of, I like to say I've been where you've been a little bit. And a lot of the arguments that we would make about how Senator Sanders would do in a general election, it was a moot point, because if you cannot win a Democratic primary, you cannot get to a general election. And so what do you say to the fact that, yes, in New Hampshire, what you got about 19%, but the Democratic primary in South Carolina is a test of how primarily Black voters feel about you. And you cannot be the Democratic nominee without Black voters. And so Black voters, they didn't come out and say, we're interested in Dean Phillips. So what is your path? Because coming up next is Nevada. You're not going to Nevada. You set your sights on Michigan. You're not on the ballot, but Nevada is next. And so I don't understand.
Well, first of all, I think I probably have 5.
So let me pause here for just a second and let me tell you what's happening here, right? So notice that she said it's a moot point. But if it was really a moot point, why did Simone Sanders and the rest of mainstream media do their damnedest to make sure that those people were silenced? Why did the DNC refuse to have any debates? Because they knew it actually wasn't a moot point, because using the example that I just gave you with Ted Kennedy and Jimmy Carter, it wasn't a moot point, because the thing is, if they would have treated them fairly, if they would have allowed debates, they could have done enough damage to Joe Biden so that Joe Biden would lose to Donald Trump. And here's the thing. I think Joe Biden's going to lose to Donald Trump regardless. That's the other part. I think he is still going to lose because he has been terrible with the economy, his foreign policy decisions, and Joe Biden obviously has difficulty speaking and knowing where he's at. Listen to what Dean had to say about this.
Percent name recognition right now in the country. No voters know me. In fact, this is my first invitation to your network in 4 months, and I'm grateful to all of you. Sincerely, I mean that. That's my whole point. The GOP has had a competition. They're on TV. They're consuming hundreds of hours of primetime television, debates, town halls. CNN has given every GOP candidate a 1-hour town hall. At least there's energy on the GOP side. We don't get energy unless there's competition. So when you coronate someone, especially a man like Joe Biden, who I respect, by the way, and I hope you know I respect Joe Biden. But at his stage in life, he is not inspiring people. We have no competition. We're absent on the airwaves. People don't care. You saw the turnout, 4%. And I'm trying to introduce myself. All I'm trying to do is wake up a party that I believe should have spirited competition to introduce a new generation of leaders. And by the way, when I came to Congress in 2019, I wanted Hakeem Jeffries to run right away. We've got to start elevating a young generation. We are so.
I agree that we do have to elevate a young generation, but not a generation of Hakeem Jeffries. He's status quo. He's corporate. There are other people that can be elevated out there. And I think those people should be elevated outside of the two-party system. The next generation that's coming in needs to be people that are running as independents, people that are running as third-party candidates. We need to change the entire system. We should have as many independents in the House of Representatives as we do Democrats, or actually split it. Split it. Obviously, Democrats are still there's some that are still going to be able to hold on to those seats because of the money that is backed behind them. That's just the reality of the situation. Same thing with some of the Republican representatives as well, and senators as well, because they are backed by so much corporate money, and they're also backed by weapon contractors as well. That being said, there is no reason why we should not have at least, I'm going to go low, at least 20 independents in the House and at least 20 third-party candidates in the House. That's 40. And I'm going on the low end here. There's no reason why we should not have that, because Congress is not representative of the rest of the United States. It's really not. A lot of the people are like, they're so, no shade to the older folk, but some of these people need to retire. They kept Dianne Feinstein in there until she was on her last leg and she was not coherent. I think Nancy Pelosi needs to retire. I think Chuck Schumer, I think all these people need to go. And one of the ways to do that is to have term limits. That's how you get some of these people out of there. You start implementing term limits and then they can't be a lifetime congressperson. Let's continue.
suppressing voters and candidates and debate, and we're not inspiring, and it's time to wake people up. Someone had to do it. In that respect, I'm winning, and I'm going to keep going.
So the chairman in me,
the strategist and the chairman, yes.
The chairman in me says, what the hell are you doing?
Sure.
Right?
You see this? Now, see, these are the same people that are complaining that we need to have democracy, but then they're going to say to him, what the hell are you doing? Why are you doing this? Because again, like I said, they remember what happened with Jimmy Carter and Ted Kennedy. But these people are telling you, if we get Donald Trump, he's going to destroy our democracy. But you guys don't want democracy either. That's why you're telling people they shouldn't run. That's why you're saying that Joe Biden is the nominee. That's why you wouldn't have debates. They pick these people. And in order to get out of this system where politicians are handpicked, we have to have free public elections in this country. Other countries have this. Get the corporate money out. Get the military industrial complex out, because that's who's picking these people. Barack Obama was chosen by Wall Street. So you just can't, you have to get the corporate money out, and then we can really see fundamental change. But do you see how they just talk to people? What the hell do you think you're doing?
Why are you doing it? Because the reality of it is the party had a chance in 2016 and in 2020 to make a different choice. All right. They did not choose Hillary. And in 2020, they had Joe Biden standing in front of them, and along with an array of other Democratic candidates, including the current vice president. And the party said no. So what makes you think that after that, with an incumbent president, Joe Biden's not going anywhere?
Notice what he said. He said the party said no. What did the people say? Because the majority of Americans don't vote. The majority of Americans stayed home. And that has continued for quite a time. So, you know, he's revealing this here. The party said no. That's all they consider, and that's all they think about. It's all about what is important to the party and then what is important to the donors.
Not stepping down.
Big
right?
mistake, by the way. Big mistake.
Matter of opinion, but individuals make their choice. Sure. And in the process of making the choice to stay in the game, 97% of that 4% that turned out voted for him. So the question becomes, in reality, are you creating a drain in the process, prolonging the narratives around his age, prolonging the narratives around other things that people are distracted by with Joe Biden, when the real threat is the man across the aisle in Donald Trump? And the polling shows at the end of the day, Donald Trump is going to lose to Joe Biden. Second final point on that. This is 2024. This is not 2016. It's not even 2008. Right. Very different race, very different electorate. That's the
2016 is not the best example that I would use in favor of the Democratic Party, because we all know the DNC rigged it against Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary. That's why there was the DNC fraud lawsuit. So if I were him, I would not use that as an example.
other thing to keep in mind, that we've already seen an indication from the base of both parties where they want to go in 2022. When democracy and the threat is in front of them, the economy and all the other concerns take a little bit of a back step. So how do you?
No. See, I got to disrupt this, and we'll let Dean Phillips. See, this is the problem here. He said the economy takes a backseat. No, the economy never takes a backseat when it comes to voting. Isn't that, let's think about this for a second. One of the reasons that Donald Trump lost in 2020, other than the pandemic and all that jazz that was happening, all that craziness at the time, and because of some of the policy decisions that he made in reference to the border issue, and people were like the kids in cages. But again, the media highlighted those things. The media, liberal media, has not been highlighting that kids are still in the cages under President Joe Biden. So you see how this works? So that being said, one of the reasons why he lost is because the economy started to decline during the pandemic. That was one of the things that people started to notice. Oh no, I'm getting laid off. The small businesses are closing because of the lockdowns, et cetera, et cetera. That is one of the things. Right now, if you look at the polls, the number one issue that voters have on their mind is the economy. So these people sitting at the table are fairly wealthy. So for them, the economy may take a back seat. But for working class people that live, especially around here in Boston, the economy is not taking a back seat. When you're working 2 jobs and you're barely making ends meet, the economy does not take a back seat. When you struggle to afford to pay for childcare because daycares are really expensive now and they continue to increase, the economy does not take a back seat. When you have to sit up there and decide whether or not you're going to pay for your car repairs so that you can get to work, or you're going to pay your light bill so that you have heat in your apartment in the winter, the economy does not take a back seat. These are rich people speaking for working class people, something they know nothing about. And we have to call it out. Let me let Dean respond here.
Sauce all of that narratively going forward, when as you tweet it, you're getting whooped.
Someone's got to do it. You know, my friends, I know every conversation you all have privately. It's probably the same ones I'm having with my colleagues, which is we're dumbfounded. And yes, he's got a commanding lead in the primaries. I get it. But look at the numbers. He is in a terrible position. The
Which
fact
numbers?
that Donald
Can we
Trump,
talk about the numbers? Let's be specific.
well, first of all, let's talk about historical approval numbers. He's in the 30s. No one's ever won re-election with numbers like
let's
that.
Talk about the voters.
Let's talk about the 7. Yes. Just forget national numbers. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
See how she wanted to skip ahead and say, let's talk about the vote when he said his approval numbers are in the 30s?
7 battleground states where he is, at least in the last Bloomberg poll, behind in every single one. But here's the bigger issue. We're living in this bubble here in Washington. When you get out around this country, as I've been doing, my goodness, it is shocking. And by the way, I'm going to wake everybody up right now. Donald Trump is listening to people. He gets it. The border chaos is absolutely front and center amongst Democrats who cannot believe that Democrats here in Washington are denying it and have been for years. Costs are
Except they had an opportunity. They had an opportunity.
In the last number of months,
and Republicans decided to bungle it.
Of course. But all I'm saying is that Donald Trump is listening. The man is a disaster for this country. We know it. And he is beating, in every meaningful poll in the battlegrounds, he is beating Joe Biden. And frankly, the country's made up his mind about his age. I'm just going to be forthright with all of you. All the talk about the past, wonderful bills that I voted for and helped market. I was a member of House Democratic leadership, infrastructure bill, CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, great investments in America. Americans are really suffering right now. 60% living paycheck to paycheck, 40% don't have $400 in the bank. And here we have the president and our party saying, GDP growth is up. Job growth is great. People are frustrated and they are fearful and they're seeing wars around the world. If we wake up, and my mission is to wake us up, I respect Joe Biden. He should have passed the torch. There are wonderful next generation candidates ready to go. I called them to inspire them. This was not a mission for me, but someone had to do this. And I'm simply saying the quiet part out loud. This is not a mission of antagonism. I'm not pointing out anything, Michael, that is not clear and present and obvious. This notion of encapsulating him, don't debate, don't appear in front of voters, don't do anything unscripted, don't do interviews, don't do town halls. He's going to have to. And when people see it, it's going to be really difficult to overcome. And I only ran for Congress the morning after the 2016 election. My 16-year-old daughter was in her bedroom crying. She had just overcome cancer. She's a gay woman. I didn't know it at the time. I saw fear in her eyes like I'd never seen in my kids' eyes. I had to do something. I promised them I would. I ran for Congress, flipped a 60-year Republican district blue. Beat a guy who won by 14. And I lost.
Okay, so this is Dean basically telling them, look, Joe Biden is a bad idea. This is Dean telling them Joe Biden is going to lose to Donald Trump. That's basically what he's trying to let them know. And yeah, Donald Trump, he's blowing smoke up people's ass too. But the difference is people are getting the impression that he actually cares. And now we've had two. We've had a Biden presidency and we've had a Trump presidency. And some people are looking at their pocketbooks and they're starting to see, you know what? My finances were actually better under President Trump. This is Dean trying to sound the alarm. And I think this is really important for people to hear. Now, in this clip here, I want you to see this. Shout out to Case Study QB. They're talking about the danger from the party in reference to Joe Biden's electability here. Listen to this.
Senior political columnist for Politico, Jonathan Martin. His latest piece is entitled, "Forget No Labels, Biden's Third-Party Peril is on the Left." And Jonathan, you write in part this: "It's the left that presents the most acute peril to the president. Few in the administration sense the danger more than Vice President Kamala Harris. From holiday parties to a dinner at her residence last month for a group of prominent black men, Harris has been telling sympathetic Democrats outside the White House that she recognizes the political challenge posed by Biden's unwavering public support for Israel. I'm told by officials familiar with her comments at the events.
Nope.
Part of the president's challenge, particularly with younger Democrats deriving their news almost entirely from social media, is they don't hear of Biden pushing Netanyahu behind the scenes. There is a hate the sin, love the sinner element to Biden's approach to Israel that some in Gen Z can't fully grasp."
So, Jonathan, very fascinating. You have most Democrats fearing what's going to happen from no labels and independent candidates. Would you say the danger comes from within Joe Biden's own party?
Well, or the far left folks that would otherwise be Democrats, Joe, but are now sort of radicalized. And Democrats have touched this stove twice in the last quarter century, right? They lost in 2000, of course, in part because of Ralph Nader on the left, and lost in 2016 in part because of Jill Stein on the left. And it's a more acute challenge now because you've got a conflict in the Middle East that's galvanizing and radicalizing younger voters and sort of leaving them to say, well, as you know, the old line, Joe, that you know so well, that there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties.
There it is. There it is. I told you, the presidency of Donald Trump, followed by a presidency of Joe Biden, has basically shown a lot of people. And by the way, he says young people. It's not just young people. It's shown a lot of people that, guess what? These parties aren't as different as we thought. They're basically divided under small government, big government. And I'd even argue about that with the Democratic Party now, considering how they have moved further to the right, and social issues, right? But it's more so a lot of times those social issues that keep the people divided amongst those parties, right? But now that we have had both, people are able to see, well, hell, Biden is continuing some of Trump's policies. Biden is building onto Trump's border wall. You know, so people are able to see these parties, they're not as different as we may have thought. So should we just leave the system altogether, which I did, or should we just stay at home or get out into the streets and voice our opinion? And a lot of people have been protesting, and it's not just young people. I've covered these protests. There are older people at these protests as well. I've seen whole families. I've seen people bring the entire family with the kids and everything at these protests. So you may see a lot of young people on screen on some of the the media networks, but if you actually have gone to some of the pro-Palestinian protests, you'll see there's people of all different ages, of all different races, fighting for humanity. And for me, this is not a Democrat thing. This is not a Joe Biden thing, a Republican thing. It's a humanitarian issue. And that's how I look at it, right? So he's basically saying that the third parties are going to be more of a threat to Joe Biden than, the threat coming from within his own party, than like the Marianne or the Dean Phillips. I would say the biggest threat to Joe Biden is himself. It's his policies. It's a lot of the decisions that he made, reneging on some of the promises that he made to voters. He's his biggest threat.
If younger voters believe that in October of this year, that a vote for Biden is indifferent than a vote for Trump when it comes to the Middle East, that's not going to get them off their couch. And if it does, they're going to pull the lever for Jill Stein or Cornel West or Bobby Kennedy. And I think this is a numbers game, guys, and this is a campaign that's going to be won or lost at the margins. And if Biden loses 30,000 votes in, Ann Arbor, Michigan, or Madison, Wisconsin, that's the election right there.
There it is. There it is. So while the media is hyping up Joe Biden's primary win in South Carolina, which they had already rigged anyway, what should they really be focusing on? Those swing states that Joe Biden is actually losing to Donald Trump. Joe Biden's losing in Michigan. If he loses Michigan, that's a wrap. Now, I want to bring up this point here. They actually interviewed a Black pastor who also brought up the Gaza issue in reference to Joe Biden's reelectability. Listen to this.
What about also voters of color, particularly Black voters, who this president has seen an erosion of support at times? You mentioned a Cornel West, maybe it's RFK Jr. What's the level of concern there? That's not just a third-party candidate could draw away progressives, but also part of what should be considered the Democratic base, Black voters.
Yeah. Well, that's an enthusiasm challenge that is significant that I think the Biden folks recognize they have to work on. But I think it's not totally separate from his challenges on the far left. Talking to Democrats last week for my column, one of the things that stuck out to me was Black pastors starting to criticize Biden on the Middle East. One congressman told me a Black pastor took him aside and said, you know, what's going on with this war in Gaza? Because my parishioners are starting to bring this up. That's a Black church. That's not, you know, the barista in Madison, Wisconsin. So
you hear this? So here's the other thing. Not everyone who is against the war in Gaza is on the far left. I want to go ahead and clear that up. Some people just see this as a humanitarian issue. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily far left, right? Like that. I mean, my daddy isn't far left and he got a problem with this. So just think about that for a second. But now they're telling you, he talked to a Black pastor and he's like, what is going on with this Gaza issue? Because my members of the church have been coming to me and they're venting about this and I need to know what's up.
It's a real challenge, Jonathan, that includes Black voters too.
Jonathan, Al Sharpton, when you talk about Black churches and others that have raised the question, and that's clearly the case. I mean, I certainly came out strong when January, October 7th happened, but
Al confused.
Clearly, I'm disturbed with Netanyahu and I'm disturbed what's going on in Gaza. The fact that you are raising this, though, do you think if the Biden campaign made a clear distinction, I mean, without trying to have it both ways, that they're not supporting Netanyahu and, in fact, deal with other issues, that this can deal with the enthusiasm question? Because I think some on the far left will be far left, but I think that mainstream Black vote that is now questioning, and all of us are saying that there is no real straightforward language on what's going on here.
So let me explain the BS that Al Sharpton is trying to parrot here. If Joe Biden comes forward and says that he's not aligned with Netanyahu and that he doesn't agree with Netanyahu, but he's still funding Israel, does Al Sharpton think we're that dumb? I think you need to give younger people more credit, Al. They're very resourceful. I can tell you from experience working with the younger kids, they are very resourceful. Remember, they're the internet generation. They know how to look things up. But the fact that Al Sharpton is bringing up Netanyahu as the only barrier to the situation is also pretty disingenuous, because Al Sharpton has also been told about the history and how this all started. You can replace Netanyahu with someone else and the Palestinian people will still be occupied and oppressed. So you have to change the actual system that is in place. But he really thinks people are this dumb. Joe Biden, if you just come forward and say you're not in cahoots with Netanyahu, man, we see the money going out the door. We see you still sending weapons to Israel. Isn't Congress voting on this right now to send billions of dollars to Israel again? They really think young people are dumb.
Well, here's the reluctance, Reverend, on that is that the Biden folks are trying to get this moonshot deal in the Middle East. And I think to do that, you can't really come out against Netanyahu because they're trying to get a deal with the Israelis and the Saudis.
Let me correct him. You can't come out and you can't condemn Netanyahu not necessarily because you're trying to get a deal. They can't condemn Netanyahu because they belong to the Israeli lobby. I told you and showed you this before. You look on Open Secrets, Joe Biden has taken the most money from the Israeli lobby going all the way back to 1990. He's taken over $4 million. That is why they're not going to openly condemn Netanyahu. There are too many members sitting up in Congress and sitting up in the Senate that have been bought and paid for and protected by the Israeli lobby.
In which there would be some path toward a two-state solution. You would also get a security deal between the U.S. and the Saudis, and the Saudis would recognize Israel as a state. And I think if you're going to get that kind of deal, it's a long shot, obviously. You can't really cut ties with the current prime minister of Israel during negotiations, but there's
No, you can't cut ties when the money is the tie. It's not about making no damn deal. It's about the money that is tied to it and the interest of the state of Israel. That's what this is about. Why do you guys think JFK said that AIPAC back then, it should register as a foreign agent? That came from JFK. And you see what happened to him. So there you go. That was never implemented. Joe Biden right now, regardless of his win in South Carolina, is losing to Donald Trump. This is crazy, man. This is crazy. I want you to show him the approval rating. This is whack. Wiggity, wiggity, whack.
Let's just start with the bottom line. When you ask folks, hey, if it's the general election and it's Trump versus Biden, in our poll, Donald Trump now leads Joe Biden by 5 points. Compare that to the last time we polled back in November. Trump was ahead then, but it was only by 2 points. And it's even more significant when you look at it this way. Over time, we have been testing for 5 years now, going back to 2019, a Biden-Trump matchup. Remember, 2019, 2020, Joe Biden led. He led big in every single one of our polls. For the first time in November, Donald Trump pulled ahead in our poll, and now at 5 points, this is the biggest lead NBC has ever had in 16 polls for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. And of course,
but Joe Biden won 97% of the vote in South Carolina. You see why that's not the win that they're telling you that it is? This is embarrassing. If I was Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, you guys should be embarrassed. Obama and Hillary Clinton, both of you should be embarrassed. Okay? Hillary, you should be embarrassed for losing to Donald Trump in the first damn place. How you lose how you do that bad, Hill? How you do that bad? Your husband was president. He didn't tell you about the game. He didn't tell you about how to win over the Rust Belt, or did he tell you and you just chose not to listen? So there's that. Obama, you need to be embarrassed too. You need to be embarrassed with both of them because you propped up Hillary Clinton and then she lost to Donald Trump. And then you pushed and promoted Joe Biden, told people to drop out the race to help Joe Biden win in 2020. And then it looks like he's about to lose to Donald Trump in 2024. How you do that, huh? How you make that happen?
undergirding all of this is this question of he is the incumbent, Joe Biden. We ask voters, what do you think of the job he's doing? And look at that, Kristen, 37% approve and now 60% disapprove.
And we should say that is the lowest approval rating since former President George W. Bush's second term.
Yeah, and it's put that in further context, too. Bush in his second term wasn't running for re-election. Here's the presidents who were running for re-election in our poll starting their re-election year. What was their approval rating? Bush was over 50. He won. Obama was almost at 50. He won. Trump 4 years ago was 46. He lost. Look how low Biden's number is compared to those predecessors.
Pay attention to these numbers, guys. Nobody has won with this approval rating. Remember that come November.
At this point.
Their numbers all much bigger than President Biden's.
It shows you the improvement Biden has to make here in the coming months. The issues that are driving this, too, the economy, no surprise, we've been talking about it, but look at that advantage for Trump, 22 points, and securing the...
You see this? Dealing with the economy, Donald Trump 55%, Joe Biden 33%. You guys see this? But the gentleman in the other clip told you that the economy gets pushed to the back burner. I told you the economy is always usually the number one thing. Then there's securing the border, 57% Donald Trump, 22% Joe Biden. Man, what an embarrassment.
Border here, folks, say very important. Trump with a 35-point advantage.
The economy is so striking, Steve, because jobs are up, inflation is down. Voters aren't giving him credit for that, clearly.
No, the economy numbers are not striking, because if you've been paying attention, just because there's an increase of jobs, and they don't tell you what the jobs are. They don't tell you if they're full-time, part-time, contract, temp. A lot of these new roles, at least in Massachusetts, are gig positions that don't include benefits. So there's that. But again, these are people who are not paying attention to those kitchen table issues because they don't have to. These people are pretty well off. If you go out and actually talk, you guys leave that damn studio and you go out and actually talk to working class people on the street, you'll understand why the polling is the way that it is in reference to the economy under Joe Biden. Last year alone, did you guys know this? This was reported by CNBC. Last year, layoffs increased by 98%. 98%. This is why I told you it's a lie when they say the economy is doing well. I don't know how often you guys go to the grocery store. I go once a week because I usually buy items that are perishable items. I buy a lot of fruit, vegetables, that kind of stuff. I usually go stop in there once a week and grab a little bit of something. The grocery store prices are still high. So you're not fooling us.
Yeah, there are a couple areas in here, I think, where Democrats see potential opportunities to grow Biden's support. Certainly, they are hoping the economy, folks change their perceptions of it and start rewarding Biden for it. That's what they're hoping, certainly.
So winning South Carolina doesn't really mean much, son.